Good morning, everyone. Um, Apologies for the slight delay. I had some technical issues getting logged in. Welcome, everyone. And we have the first panel this morning, which is infrastructure finance in Turkey. I'm joined by three experts in the sector, and I'll ask each of them to perhaps just do a brief introduction about themselves, and then I'll sort of move on to doing some questions. So perhaps, Sinem Hanım, if you could start off by introducing yourself to the audience.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Jared. Hi, everyone. I'm the Infrastructure and Real Estate Financing Manager at Garanti Bank BBVA at Investment Banking team. I have been with the bank for more than 13 years now, and we're at the project finance department mainly covering energy infrastructure and M&A transactions. So I think basically that's it.
Excellent. And then Barış Bey, if you could introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Jared. So first of all, thank you very much for this great opportunity. And also, I would like to thank you for the distinguished audience to participate. So I am the General Coordinator responsible for investments and project finance at Yapı Merkezi. I have a civil engineering background, but spent a major part of my professional career in banking and finance area, 3 years at HSBC Corporate and Global Banking, 9 years at Denizbank, project and structured finance, and early 2020, I have moved from lender's side to investor side and joined Yapı Merkezi, and I am at my current position now. I am highly experienced in PPP projects, project finance, corporate finance M&As, thanks to taking part in the closing of projects of several PPP transactions from various sectors such as energy generation, distribution, airports, motorways, and bridges. Thank you again for this opportunity.
Great, thank you very much. And Yasmin Hanım, if you could briefly introduce yourself as well, that would be wonderful.
Thank you, Jared. My name is Yasemin. I am heading the representative office of KfW IPEX Bank in Turkey. I've been with the bank for 12 years, and before that I was for 7 years. Our bank has been financing infrastructure projects globally for many years, and Turkey is one of our focus countries, so we are happy to be working in this country. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. And for those of you who are in the audience who I have not had a chance to meet, my name is Jared Grubb. I'm a partner at Clifford Chance, working in Istanbul. I've been in Istanbul for over 5 years now, and primarily doing project finance. So I'm also a member of Clifford Chance's worldwide project finance team as well. So I think let's start off, because obviously this is the first session of the whole day, and I think this is going to set the scene for how things go. But let's start off by getting a sense of where the market in Turkey is at the moment. What sort of deals have we been seeing in the market over the last couple of years, and in the last obviously 12 to 18 months? You know, what has COVID had any sort of impact? And perhaps, Sinem Hanım, if I can get you to kick off on that one, to sort of just give us a flavour for where the situation is.
Yeah, of course, sure. Well, what has been achieved in energy and infrastructure investments in Turkey so far, I think, is a success story. I mean, when we look at 2013 and forwards, we have mega PPP projects starting from Eurasia Tunnel, Third Bridge, Gebze, İzmir, and I will touch base on North Marmara and Çanakkale further. But when we look at that and some privatizations, mega energy transactions, I think it was a success story. After 2018, the activity in the project finance market in terms of deal amount have been reduced. But as the financings and the market focus was mainly on mega PPP projects, where we have government guarantees, we had multi-billion-dollar financings provided for a single transaction. And when we look at 2018 and 19, the spotlight projects were Northern Marmara Motorway and Çanakkale Bridge and Motorway. Actually, for 2020, we were expecting a great number of tenders and deals to be financed both in greenfield and business refinancings. But due to COVID, many sectors were deeply impacted. I think it should be noted that infrastructure projects are well structured. So, of course, there are inevitable effects of COVID on some sectors in terms of requirement of refinancings and restructurings. But thanks to both public and private sector fulfilling their commitments, we have not seen investors or lenders losing confidence to this market. Some concrete examples, I think, here can be the 2 new motorway tenders that took place in 2020, Aydın Denizli and Nakkaş Başakşehir, where there was strong interest among the investors. Another example can be the new EPCF structures for high-speed railway projects. Again, we can emphasize here the contractors' interest for these transactions. Maybe the audience may know that there were 3 projects tendered in 2020. So when we look 2020, we didn't see many financial closings of these projects, but actually 2020 was a bit more like preparation year maybe. There were tenders, but all of the financial closing of these projects, I expect them to be closed within this year, although the tenders were completed last year. So therefore, in terms of financing, last 12, 18 months, I'm starting from 2020, I think was pretty calm compared to previous years. Of course, we weren't sitting empty-handed in 2020. We had some small refinancings and capex purposes financings mainly, where in such sectors, because of regulation, we need to have capex and financings. But relatively, these are smaller transactions. And of course, there were some M&A transactions in various sectors. But when we look at the big infrastructure pipeline, we didn't have many financial closings in 2020.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's set the scene. Barış, Yasmin, do you have any additional thoughts on how you sort of see the scene, or how COVID may have impacted, or you've seen COVID impact over the last 12 to 18 months?
So,
Okay. Awesome.
sorry, Yasemin Hanım, will you go ahead or?
No, please go ahead.
Okay, just I would like, Sinem Hanım has already summarized the big picture very well. Just I would like to refer to one important issue there, and one important statement there. She said that since both the private sector, both the sponsors and also the government has fulfilled their obligations soundly, despite the extraordinary conditions and the economic slowdown conditions, then that's why there is no loss of confidence in the market. This is a very important issue I would like to underline again. So we hope that once the economy is stimulated again and the unfavorable conditions of COVID will expire, then the projects there will be again a stimulation and acceleration on the pipeline.
Yeah.
Not much to add from my side. I think Sinem Hanım and Barış Bey summarized it very well. And of course, as a consequence of the pandemic, there was a slowdown. But I think everyone was still working on their homework. And once the pandemic is hopefully easing or over, there are a lot of projects to be completed and tendered, and we'll see more.
I think that maybe I'll ask you the next question then as well. Is now we've sort of set the scene. I suppose one of the key questions that everyone has in their mind is actually, what about the future, and more importantly, what do we see happening in the sector over the next few years? Maybe Yasmin Hanım, if you can kick off on that and give us your insights.
Sure, Jared. I think Turkey is an infrastructure heaven. The strong point is that the Turkish contractors are very experienced, both in Turkey and globally, and they are very, very precise in executing these transactions successfully. And with the support of financial institutions, both in Turkey and globally, Turkey has a really good track record of financing infrastructure, or completing and financing infrastructure projects. The current government always had very ambitious infrastructure targets. I think they still continue to have so. And if you look at their latest investment plans, you see a really ambitious pipeline of projects. I think we can divide it into several different parts of the infrastructure. On transport side, as Sinem Hanım mentioned, there are the high-speed railway projects that are going to be financed and built, and there are also road projects that are planned. I think there are at least 6 projects in the road side that are planned to be tendered still in 2021. I think healthcare, Turkey has shown that investing in these healthcare projects has been very instrumental in this pandemic period. So I would expect that to continue with this type of city hospitals under the PPP scheme or different types of schemes. On energy side, I think Turkey has been quite well in developing especially the renewable portfolio, and with further YEKA projects that is planned to continue, I think, in the coming years. In telecom, I think that's one important infrastructure part that Turkey would be focusing on with all these switching to online. I think digital infrastructure has become quite important, so I would expect that there would be some investments going forward on that. And wastewater projects as an infrastructure project are going to be quite important, as we see in the Marmara Sea. Those are essential. So there's really no there is no shortness of projects for Turkey, as long as there is interest from the investors and the financiers. I think there are many projects to work on.
Great. And Sinem or Barış, do you have anything additional from your side as to what you see coming up in the next couple of years?
I totally agree with Yasemin. So I think what we have seen during COVID is that also Yasemin mentioned that Turkey is an infrastructure heaven. I really like that phrase. Also, we see that while structuring these projects, risks are realistically covered and the sector is resilient. And in the near future, that's why personally I believe that the interest will continue to increase and recovery will provide financial stimulus. So on top of the EPCF projects and motorway projects, I think that it's really important that we should all focus on sustainability side of infrastructure projects as well, like the wastewater and solid waste projects. And on the pipeline, we are hearing that there will be some port privatizations, marine port privatizations. And I also expect that there would be business refinancings with the recovery. I mean, after the recovery, because, the CDS rates are and hopefully will go down, and with the cost of fundings of local banks decreasing, I think we will see more business refinancings in the upcoming future as well.
Excellent.
Okay, at the moment I don't have any additional comments. Yasemin and Sinem Hanım summarized very well.
Yeah, no, and it's a great positive story of things to come. But I suppose, Barış, I'm going to ask you a question next. I think if we have all these great new projects upcoming, and in particular, obviously, the size of projects in Turkey, obviously they may vary, but you get some very, very big projects. Do you think the traditional sponsors in the market really have the cash and the balance sheet strength at the moment to take on these new projects, or do you think there are some opportunities perhaps for newer players on the sponsor side, or maybe do you think we'll see more international sponsors coming into what has been often a more traditionally Turkish sponsor dominated sort of part of the market? I don't know, what are your thoughts in relation to that sponsor side of the project?
Mm-hmm. Well, this is one of the hardest questions that I market. So actually, honestly speaking, I'm in the opinion, Jared, that this response is related more with the sustainability of the financing models currently used rather than the financial strength of the sponsors, because we are talking about gigantic investments, multi-billion-dollar projects, where the financing is a key factor to consider on a primary basis. And here, governments and governmental authorities have two main options. The first one is the conventional EPC, where the government will either allocate its own funds or it will borrow the monies from banks and financial institutions by converting the EPC to an EPCF model. And this will definitely result in an increase in sovereign financial indebtedness. And the alternative model is the PPP, as we all know, and where the government aims a collaboration here with the private sector in order to extend its financial obligations to mid and long term. And if we compare these two alternatives at a glance, then we see that governments usually tend to go with PPP model. But on the other hand, the story is inherently vice versa for the sponsors, because sponsors similarly aim to get the return at the earliest convenience. So up to now, the transportation infrastructure investments in Turkey have been sponsored mainly via contracting originated groups, the construction companies, as we all know. And by the way, I just would like to add a footnote here as well. The healthcare PPP projects are a different story, where I shared my comments during previous webinars as well. That's why I'll continue with the transportation infrastructure part again. So let's talk about a $1 billion project with a total investment cost of $1 billion, and consider a debt to equity ratio of 70-30, which is required to obtain the debt assumption commitment from the Treasury. This means that a sponsor is obliged here to provide an equity amount of at least $300 million, and this is a very huge amount. But in return of that, a considerable cash inflow or dividend flow might be expected only after 10 or 15 years at the earliest, once the senior project finance loan facility has been fully or majorly, at least majorly repaid. So we should admit that liquidity is always a key issue for every contractor. And this is regardless of their balance sheets, because as I emphasized many times, we are not private equity funds. We are commercial companies, we are contractors. And especially during economic downturn cycles, as both Yasemin Hanım and Sinem Hanım also emphasized, and the extraordinary circumstances of COVID, these are exacerbating the conditions for all the commercial companies further, and also the construction companies. Hence, it might not be sustainable for a sponsor to continue growing its PPP asset portfolio beyond just one or two projects. But what's the solution then? We need to find a common ground here. And here, each party has a task on that, per my opinion. First of all, if you look at the government the projects in the pipeline should be selected and also prioritized by the authority carefully and precisely. And here, the repayment of the investment for these selected projects should primarily rely on its own generated cash inflows by the project itself, rather than being totally undertaken by the Treasury. And this will definitely entice the international investors and also sponsors for these projects and for Turkish markets. And when we look at the sponsor side, we should also admit that sponsors need to change their perspective a little bit also. So how can I say it? There is a long-term business plan at the beginning, where the debt structuring and the return forecasts rely on, and all the IRR analysis rely on. And the majority of the sponsors set their mindset just limited with that initial business plan. So win the tender, sign the project agreement, achieve the financial close, get the loan, make the equity injection, complete the construction, and put it aside. Or in other words, follow it, and expect a dividend inflow in the remote future. So this is definitely not a sustainable way for expanding the PPP portfolio, and investors need to start thinking outside the box. So, and here, first of all, sponsors should acknowledge that these are living assets, where there are always opportunities for mergers and acquisitions, new strategic partnerships, project bond issuance, or equity mezzanine financing or refinancing options for the senior debt also, all to optimize the cash inflow and increase the value of the assets. All these opportunities and processes should be followed up precisely by sponsors throughout the whole project life, not only at the beginning of the project, not only prior to financial close. And moreover, such strategic partnerships could be also negotiated at the beginning prior to commercial close as well, because the main concern of financial investors is the completion risk. The international sponsor, main concern of the international sponsors and also the financial investors is the completion risk, whilst the main constraint at contractor side is the need for equity in huge amounts. So according to some exit strategies for contractors from the SPV, after achieving the commercial operations, and also further a reasonable ramp-up period to the extent possible might be implemented, and this might alleviate the concerns of both parties here. So consequently, involvement of sponsors and financial investors are always vital for the continuity and sustainability of large-scale infrastructure investments here in Turkey, and a proper asset management by sponsors is inevitable to explore all these opportunities throughout the project life. So therefore, companies conducting a sound asset management activity will definitely have an edge over the competitors in the market. So these are my comments in brief.
Yeah, no, I think that's interesting, and I think it will be obviously, as we now have a lot of projects that have come out of the of that construction phase that are operating. They've had the ramp up period. It'll be interesting to sort of see what we see in the M&A sort of space in the context of, as you say, those sponsors looking to release equity more quickly than waiting till sort of later on in the project to actually be able to access those dividends and returns. So, but Sinem or Yasmin, do you have any other sort of comments from your perspective as sort of on the lender side in the context of sponsor strength and whether we will see a different mix of sponsors coming into the market over the next year or two?
Yes, I totally agree, Barış Bey, saying that normally we see Turkish construction companies, contractors, mainly at the motorway or big infrastructure tenders, let's say. And in international standards, we also see institutional investors or maybe like infrastructure funds or companies, big conglomerates that are only investing in that project, not because they are also the contractors. But now, I mean, up until now, yes, we had this in Turkey, but starting from now, we see international investors' interest in operational PPPs. So, as Barış Bey mentioned, there can be lots of opportunities for having an M&A or having a partnership. And these international investors so far that we have seen are not like the construction companies we have in Turkey, but they are infrastructure funds or institutional investors mainly looking. Of course, they have their IRR targets and they have their return expectations, but I think there will be a good opportunity since we in most of the projects we are reaching the operational period, like on the motorway side, if you look Third Bridge, Gebze, Northern Marmara Motorway, Eurasia Tunnel, these are all operational. So when the construction period is over, I think we will see more and more interest coming from the international side.
I agree with the comments of Barış Bey and Sinem Hanım. I think when it comes to tenders, the participants have always been a handful of construction companies that are interested in going through this challenge. But once these projects are completed and in an operational phase, I would assume that there will be more interest from infrastructure funds and other investors. So we are still in that investment phase, and once that's completed, that's where the market will be going.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. Quite an interesting development to follow that over the next couple of years. But I suppose I'll come back to you now, Cinnamon, and just obviously the flip side of how the company is going to fund the equity is obviously going back to the financing, which obviously makes up 60 to 80% of the actual money that's going in to develop these projects. And I suppose what's the sort of situation there at the moment? How are the Turkish banks sort of placed generally? We're seeing any sort of changes because obviously we've had in some projects, some international banks have been more interested, in other projects perhaps less. Have we seen any sort of material changes in the sort of terms for the financing over the last few years, which as the market has developed? Any other sort of insights on the financing side that might be interesting for the audience?
Yeah, sure. I can start with saying that Turkish banks are still in the market. We support mega infrastructure projects. As we all know, local banks have more take and hold strategy rather than rotating the loans, and mainly participate with larger ticket sizes compared to international lenders. So at the moment, we see that this is still the case. And personally, I do not expect any change in the appetite. Of course, the share that local banks can take out of this pie may reach certain limits, as local banks may run into sponsor or sectoral concentration limits, because these are mega projects requiring large financing needs. So therefore, the optimum way going forward is also to involve and catch the appetite of international banks and tap alternative sources as well, funding sources as well. For instance, in some of the projects last couple of years, we see contribution from Islamic banks, and also local and international development banks are rising here as well. We are seeing the changes to the way or type of international banks are getting involved, because we are seeing international banks also having appetite to both greenfield financings, and also to refinancings where there is an international angle. We are seeing interest from international investors to operational PPP projects, as we have discussed in the previous question. So there is also appetite for refinancing. Plus, when we do the market sounding, we hear that there is also appetite to newly tendered, for example, these motorways and high-speed railway projects, both on international lenders and also ECS side, IFI side as well. So I believe that parties are keen to play a role in the PPP projects in Turkish market. Especially during COVID and afterwards, to have the same financing terms and conditions pre-COVID structure, the bankability issues, again, will play an important role. Contracts, bankability of major contracts, I believe that it will be important because force majeure clauses are now more interested and practically challenged, maybe back-to-back cost and time reliefs given in the contracts. Relevant mitigants going further should be elaborated in terms of financing. I mean, of course, we were doing these pre-COVID financings, but afterwards, I think there would be more discussions going on between us and sponsors and our lawyers in terms of these conditions. Of course, it is relieving to see that these theoretical structured mechanisms are working in practice. And going forward, material points that we all should consider in more detail should be this technical and financial analysis. Sufficient tail periods will be important here. Sustainability of the cash flows with some stress scenarios maybe, again, will be important. Efficient risk management systems and bankability of the contracts, again, definitely lessons are learned during COVID.
Yeah, I think that's always the case. Lessons are always learned when things are challenged, which is great. So, Boris, Yasmin, do you have any sort of comments on what you sort of see? I think I might pick up on what Sinem said about ECAs and IFIs as well, and ask Yasmin in a moment to perhaps focus on that. But before we move on to that, anything from your side that you're sort of seeing in relation to the current state of play for financing in the market?
I think so far Turkish banks have been very instrumental in realizing their projects. I think with their contribution, with many of those projects being realized, and I would see that continue going forward. But said we will come to the international banking aspect or the ECA financing aspect.
Mm-hmm. And as I was listening to Sinem Hanım's comment, I realized that we are encountering the similar issues, equivalent issues as investors and lenders, because during my previous question, I have pointed out the issue about for sponsors about sticking on the initial business plan, and that many sponsors don't accept that these are living assets and they should explore opportunities throughout the loan life. And Sinem Hanım pointed out a similar problem at lender side as well. She mentioned about the take and hold strategy. Yes, I totally agree that this is a problem at lender side as well, and that I have also experienced when I was at the lender side for a long period. Similar to the sponsors, what I propose to the sponsors, I also have a similar proposal to lenders as well. They should look for instance, security assignments options, secondary market sales, or again, as Sinem Hanım mentioned, Islamic. They should explore the Islamic markets, and they should look for opportunities at that site. And they also should optimize their asset portfolio so that this will help them to decrease the cost of funding and continue providing financing to the future infrastructure projects on a more sustainable way.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. I think certainly from our side, we certainly see the take and hold strategy as still being the dominant approach. But we have seen over the last few years, and perhaps certainly with some of these key transactions, which where there is government support as well, we have seen margin lending against those transactions as well, so that banks are able to free up some capital. While also retaining a stake in the deal. So it's not what we would see perhaps in other markets, in the sense, but I guess, because of the take and hold sort of approach. But certainly we are seeing some movement there from some of the lenders in the context of how they manage their book. So I want to move on, as I alluded to just a few moments ago, and ask Yasmin if you could perhaps talk about some of the other players. And I think Sinem alluded to them in particular, about the ECAs, IFIs, those sort of things. What are we sort of seeing in the market around those? Are we seeing perhaps any other interest from other types of investors, financial investors or funds? From your perspective, have you sort of seen anything along those lines yet, or is it sort of still not quite ready for the Turkish market in the sense of having funds directly lending in yet? I think there are some structural issues and some tax issues, etc., around those, which are probably limiting it. But I certainly would be interested to hear your thoughts on what you're sort of seeing as well.
Mm-hmm. I think international interest in the form of lending or equity has been rather limited, or not in every part of the infrastructure sector. I think in energy we have seen a lot of international financing and funds interested in this sector. In transport, I think in road projects, the interest has been quite limited. It's also related to the investor and equipment side, because when there's an international party that's involved in terms of lending, there is usually a link either on the investor side or the equipment side. Same goes for the ECA. You need some foreign equipment to be financed in these infrastructure projects, which is very limited in the road projects. So we haven't seen that much interest in those projects. But in high-speed railway, I think there is a lot of potential for ECA funding and international banks' participation. In energy, I think that will still continue. There are some challenges in the renewable side with the new Yektem tariff being in Turkish lira. So we will see how the ECAs and the international lenders take it. And in healthcare, I think the IFIs have been very, very important in bringing these projects forward. The likes of EBRD and IFC and other development finance institutions have taken part in a number of these financings, led those transactions, and that gave comfort to other international lenders joining these transactions. So I think going forward, that would definitely continue. And as more investors, international investors or contractors are involved in these infrastructure projects, it will be easier for international banks to participate, use different kinds of risk mitigants to finance these projects. And ECA is a very important part of it. We have seen it, for example, in the Çanakkale Bridge, that the involvement of a Korean contractor brought some ECA element to the project. So the more we see those things, the more it will be easier for international banks to invest in Turkey. Unfortunately, with COVID and before that with some economic challenges, of course, the rating of the country is impacted, and every international bank has as a limit for Turkey, and any factor that can mitigate the risk that you're taking in the country would be very welcome. And I think CAs are still very interested in supporting Turkish projects because Turkey has a good track record of paying these loans back. And that's a very important factor, regardless of the country rating of Turkey. That's a very positive factor to count in. And as long as there are good projects, well structured, with good sponsors, I think there will be interest from the international lenders. With regards to funds, of course, it's not my area of specialty, but I think as we just spoke, there would be more interest in operational assets rather than the new ones coming up.
Yeah. And Barış or Sinem, do you have any thoughts on IFIs, ECAs, potentially for funds coming in? Are you seeing anything at this stage?
Just a reminder, Jared, and Barış, you may remember, Yasemin mentioned Çanakkale. It was like the Empire Sun never sets, because we had 26 financial institutions, ECAs, Islamic trenches, conventional Turkish facility, conventional international facility. So we couldn't even find the time slot to have conference calls because we have Korean lenders. We have Turkish lenders, we have international lenders in Europe. So, Yasemin, I can touch base on that. It's really important. We are seeing ECA interest as well when there's an international angle.
Yeah, no, I remember well. There was a 2-hour spot in the middle of the day. We were able to actually get people online. So, yeah.
And as a representative of the sponsor, I am very happy to hear about the good and positive comments of Yasemin Hanım and Sinem Hanım. And I would like to express that we will continue to expect the strong support of our lenders in the future again, in order to be able to realize our new projects in the future.
Excellent. And I'll pick up directly on that now, actually, Boris, and ask you the next question. So, so traditionally, the sector has been overwhelmingly financed through bank debt. I think, as we've sort of alluded to, most of the big transactions have been financed by way of bank debt. Do you see that changing going forward? I think in the last year we've seen some projects use some slightly different models, some looking at more of the capital markets, etc. But do you think there's going to be anything changing, or do you think that the bank debt is the best way at the moment for financing? What are your sort of thoughts from the sponsor side about options for actually obtaining that financing?
Mm-hmm. So, well, actually, of course, there are many more alternatives there which might be considered at a glance. And as we discussed throughout this panel also many times, for instance, mezzanine financing, issuance of project bonds, or corporate finance solutions such as a partnership with a financial investor or a strategic investor. Or as an alternative to investment by private sector, the government might also intervene and proceed with a conventional EPC or EPCF model. These are all the options on the table which you should consider from time to time. But as long as the equity will remain as an issue and also a constraint, either for sponsors or for governments or for municipalities, reliance on bank debt will still continue, per my opinion. And for private sector investments, this is, again, regardless of their financial strength of sponsor, as I commented before. But accordingly, I would like to scrutinize another key issue here, and this is where the bank debt is provided from. So if you look at the current transportation PPP projects and transportation investments in the market, we can easily observe that the responsibility of financing is mainly left on the shoulders of local commercial banks at many of these projects. So here, the diversification of the bank debt portfolio with the involvement of international financing institutions and export credit agencies is vital to create a sustainable financing environment. And in order to attract international financiers, a strong and convincing business plan should be implemented, as also mentioned by Yasemin Hanım just before. And as Yapı Merkezi, by the way, we have two PPP assets currently in our portfolio. The first one is the Euro-Asian Tunnel, which has been completed at the end of 2016, and it's operational for more than 3 years. It has also already passed the ramp-up period and achieved to a sound traffic performance also. And our second project is the Çanakkale Suspension Bridge. And again, I would like to thank to Yasemin Hanım and Sinem Hanım, because they have showed this project as a benchmark for it, and I am glad to hear about that. So at this project, we aim to achieve the COD, commercial operations date, by the end of this year. And once the project is finished, our bridge will be the biggest suspension bridge all over the world in terms of the midspan of more than 2 kilometers, by surpassing the Akashi Kaikyo Bridge in Japan. And we do put all our efforts to finish this project, complete this project by the end of this year. And also our project has a supplementary motorway of 80 kilometers between Çanakkale and Malkara. And as mentioned, at both of these projects, we have a versatile and diversified lending consortium consisting of both international and local commercial banks, international financing institutions, and ECAs. And in particular of Çanakkale project, as directly mentioned by Sinem Hanım, our lending consortium is consisting of 25 banks. It's like the United Nations, and this diversification helped us very much to increase the effectiveness of the financing in our projects, and also enabled us to decrease the financing costs to the extent possible. And moreover, the project bonds might also be an alternative solution to provide additional funding for these projects, for these huge multi-billion-dollar projects, where we have also recent examples in the market, as you have also mentioned at the beginning. However, I would like to point out that these instruments, these project bond instruments, are more applicable once the project becomes operational and the completion risk is eliminated. Hence, the initial financing during the construction phase should still rely on conventional bank debt, per my opinion. And also here, meanwhile, I would like to mention that project bonds have another importance as well, because increase of project bond portfolio in the market means also the increase of data published for these infrastructure projects, which might be a good benchmark when assessing the future projects, future equivalent projects. And the more data we have in our hands, the better analysis might be conducted, and the value of these assets might be determined much more precisely and also fairly, which helps both the sellers and buyers. And finally, support of the government in terms of undertaking the financing directly is also important, because, as I mentioned before again, the capability of the sponsors to inject equity is available to some extent instead of being unlimited. And this is regardless of their financial strength. So EPCF model also shouldn't be put aside anytime and used by governments as a supplementary and complementary to PPP model whenever it's possible. So consequently, I can simply claim that there is no best way to finance these investments, because all these instruments we are talking about should be referred under various circumstances from time to time, and they should nurture each other. So in short, instead of being a substitute, they should be considered as a complementary to each other. This will be the best way to proceed, per my opinion.
No, that makes perfect sense. Yasmin, any thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, we have been emphasizing tapping into capital markets for such a long time. And we have seen quite a number of mega projects being tendered and also in the pipeline, not only for the cost of financing, but also with these highly prestigious projects requiring significant amount of financing from lenders, local banks may run into concentration limits, and therefore innovative financing solutions are necessary to expand the investor base. As Barış Bey mentioned, investors do not like to take construction risk of these mega projects. So here I agree with him saying that a hybrid structure can be built, like the local lenders or international lenders will fund the project, and when the project becomes operational, we may have international investors through the project bonds taking out the bank debt. And with this, we can extend the tenor, carry lower risk of the projects, decreasing cost of funding, increasing IRRs of the sponsors, and importantly, freeing up sponsor limits at the banks, at the local banks level. For example, we only had one greenfield project finance bond in a hospital PPP, and we have one port refinancing in terms of bond structure up until now. And this year, we are seeing some momentum here, I think. And we all know that I think one of the most successful examples in 2021 was the Iskenderun port bond financing with 15 years of maturity. And we were aware that the demand for this bond was far more than the bond amount. So I think bond market will be an important and strong alternative to attract investors as well.
I think one side that we might focus on will be the sustainability aspects of these projects, because that's something that's been keeping some of the international lenders and investors away. When the projects are developed quite quickly and there is not enough time to do these really detailed international standard environmental and social impact assessments, then as an investor or a lender, you hesitate to enter into these projects, and that has been the reason that there are no international lenders in some of the projects, not all. And I think sustainability, green finance going forward is very important. So once these projects are being developed, that should be something that should be considered. And once there is like a green label, that green label will help with the financing.
I think that's a really good point. I think we are seeing a lot more interest in structuring new financings as in effect with ESG principles and in effect green financing. So we are seeing that now flow through, and we're sort of it's a couple of years ago, obviously I think we did one of the first ones in in Turkey, and then I think now it was a bit of a hiatus, and now we're sort of seeing it come back again. So I think you're right, and it's going to be one of the certainly one of the interesting things that'll happen on a number of these financings. I think we've obviously, I think we're coming to the end of our time, so I think I don't want to sort of, in effect, be the first one to cause a delay for the whole day, but I'll just take a couple more minutes to ask if each of you could just perhaps give a few thoughts as to if you have any on where things are likely to go, or any other sort of observations about the future. Whether you see any sort of other changes or anything else that we haven't touched on that may be coming up that would be interesting for people to sort of hear about. I'll maybe Sinem Hanım, if you can start with you, and if there's anything you'd like to add.
Yes, of course. I mean, Turkey is a developing country and there are needs for infrastructure investments. But I think while financing these infrastructure projects, sustainability linkage, as you just mentioned, is really important. Going forward, we expect that sustainability linked loans, gender loans, green financings will take the lead. I believe that PPP scheme has proven to be more suitable for long-term financing. And we were quite successful in implementing this PPP structure in infrastructure sector together with sponsors, lenders, and ECAs and IFIs. Now there have been some upcoming projects. We know that government gives importance to these projects, and I think that will be a great opportunity on the railway side as well. We also expect to see social and sustainable PPPs. We mentioned, Yasemin Hanım mentioned, in terms of solid waste, wastewater treatments. I think again, this will be important to develop these fundamental infra needs as well, on top of the transportation needs that we all know and finance so far.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yasemin Hanım, any additional final thoughts from you about where the future lies?
I think we talked about all those
yeah.
a lot, so nothing to add on my side too, in the interest of time, actually.
Yeah. Cool. And Barış Bey, last but not least, obviously, any sort of final thoughts from you in the context of where we might see things moving in the next wee while?
Okay, so actually, I agree with my colleagues that infrastructure sector is always considered as the locomotive of the economic development, especially in the emerging markets like Turkey. And as Yasemin Hanım mentioned at the beginning, Turkey always has been an infrastructure heaven. Motorway network has been considerably enhanced, especially on the western part of the country, where some supplementary projects might be useful to strategically connect various networks to each other. On the other hand, the government might put an emphasis on developing the railway network, and they are doing so, by the way. And this will definitely help to decrease the freight costs. Of course, on one hand, the government started to expand the high-speed rail network, but also the logistics should be considered, and this will definitely help to decrease the freight costs and create a more competitive business environment for all industries. And moreover, this is also crucial for increasing the effectiveness of our container terminal ports as well. For instance, we just talked about the Iskenderun port mentioned by Yasemin and the recent bond issuance, and there was a good and positive demand on that. In order to support all these investments also, and also to stimulate the economy of Turkey, we should support our ports with the hinterlands of our ports with a good railway network. But anyway, the critical issue here is to determine the correct strategy behind these investments. For instance, whether a specific project will serve to a transit network, or it will support a particular industry to be developed in the region afterwards, or whether it will be a component of a bigger project to be realized in the future. So planning on the long term is always crucial. And as we see, as Turkey, we have always a huge pipeline ahead of us, and where we need to prioritize the project correctly and find out ways to realize them. And accordingly, if we stick on one single model, it will never be sustainable. The key issue is to build up an attractive investment environment, involve all various actors in there, such as the investors, financiers, suppliers, municipalities, and of course the central government. Observe the market dynamically and consider all these models anytime, and finally select and implement the proper one, or the proper ones applicable for the current circumstance. This might be an effective way to proceed, per my opinion. Thank you.
Brilliant. I think that's a fantastic one. I think you've set up the next, by reference to the rail, etc. I think you've set up the next the next session perfectly as well. So that's great. So I'd just like to say thank you so much. I think that's been to all of the panel here. I think that's been an absolutely amazing session. I think really good coverage of all the sort of the key issues around how things are at the moment. And so thank you so much for your time, and obviously thank you to the organisers today for arranging this. I think that's been brilliant. So thank you very much.
So just before closing, we have a question. Hasan Bey asked, there's an upcoming tender, Mersin Silifke Motorway BOT tender, and he's wondering whether our bank would be interested in participating in this financing. So, of course, Hasan Bey, these are very well structured projects, motorways. So, of course, we would be interested in this type of projects, given that there is the bankability of the contracts, risk mitigants in terms of construction risk, and having a sustainable cash flow with certain debt sizing, DSCRs, and tail periods. Of course, we would be interested in participating in financing.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you very much. We'll hand back over to the to the organisers to take us forward.
Thank you very much for coming and supporting us. Thank you for all the panelists, and especially Jared for moderating this panel. So I will close this panel, and thank you very much for attending.